Os YouTube, Sonic the Hedgehog has been having a pretty big year. A second movie, a classic compilation, and a new show, but the thing we're here to talk about today is his latest video game. Sonic Frontiers aims to bring this series in a brand new direction of 3D exploration, but with some familiar gameplay we've come accustomed to in the past decade. Going into this game, however, I couldn't help but think that this game might be the culmination of everything we've come to know and love about the franchise and its many different iterations. So come with me as we figure out what this collage of a Sonic experience plays out as. We open up with Dr. Eggman finding some sort of ancient ruins for what we can assume to be another evil plot, you know, if the yelling skybox didn't tip us off already. However, this time the game doesn't even try to pretend that the Doctor is in control, and he's whisked away into the very structure he activated with his own device. We fade into Sonic, Tails, and Amy flying into the Starfall Islands. The Chaos Emeralds were attracted to them, and the gang is up for a fun adventure to find out why. The red skybox we saw earlier, however, has different plans for them. The three are sucked into a portal, and Sonic is thrown immediately into the video game. We run through an odd skybound green hill with some weird filter thrown over the screen, and some familiar game design that might not be where it's originally from. We make our way to the end of the level, but outside of this weird space, Sonic wakes up alone on the island, right next to a similar structure that sucked in Eggman. A disembodied voice speaks to Sonic. Because he escaped cyberspace, he's the key to break the barrier between dimensions. To do this, we need to find the Chaos Emeralds, defeat the Titans, and maybe save his friends along the way.
Context? Hello?
Well, the only thing we can do now is move forward in Sonic's first open 3D game in years. I was immediately wowed by how much space I had just to run around in a circle. I knew we were getting something fundamentally different from our previous games, but feeling it truly is believing it. The game gets you accustomed to his movement with a small puzzle, in big quotation marks, that rewards us with upgrades and unlocks a section of our map. Then the game gives us a small taste of its combat. The homing attack is moved to the left face button in this game, and it's shared with the basic attack button, easily comboing things together. As we progress, we run into a mini-boss called a Guardian that really lets us cut loose. Along with your basic attack, you also get a side dodge and a parry function. In terms of combat speed and focus, we're already doing better than every other mainline Sonic game. We move forward a bit more and we get a gimmick that I think might truly be confined to this game, the side loop. The side loop has a ton of different uses that range from completing puzzles to being used in combat. It even has auxiliary functions like getting extra rings and goodies just by making a circle on the ground with it. We fight another Guardian and see another ancient structure. The Guardians drop gears that let us access these structures that will portal us into cyberspace. These are quick levels in the boost style of our past couple of Sonic games. This time you have different missions to unlock keys. You get keys by beating the level, collecting a certain amount of rings, finding the 5 red star rings, or getting an S rank by beating it within a time limit. What do these keys do? They unlock the Chaos Emeralds that are scattered across the island. Once we've grabbed the first one, the open zone is free for us to explore. But there's one more thing we need to unlock for the gameplay loop to complete itself. If you use your gold display marker, you'll quickly run into Amy. She seems to be stuck in cyberspace, and these little hearts we've been collecting, memory tokens, are what is used to unlock her. She's stuck between dimensions, so we hope that listening to the voice in our head works out for the best as we collect more gears, keys, tokens, and Chaos Emeralds.
Besides, I feel like it gave me some kind of boost.
And that is our gameplay loop. There are more than just this one island, and most of them have this loop. You have a large open zone to do as you will to collect your trinkets, but every now and then when you complete a level, collect a Chaos Emerald, or speak with one of your captured friends, you're met with story progression, and this takes the form of an antagonistic little cyber girl. Along with one of the Titans, she tries to stand in our way and makes it very clear that we aren't getting very far without the Chaos Emeralds first. Kronos Island is a very good starting area. It allows us to get used to this game's movement and world design, an expansive plain filled with ramps, dash panels, springs, and special walls you can run on. If I had to bring up one design complaint, it's that the game is pretty bad about telling you all of your abilities. When you load up one of the cyberspace levels, the game sends you into one of these little practice voids as it loads, and it goes over all of your moves. It also asks you to combine them from time to time to get used to challenges you'll be facing sooner or later. It's really nice actually, but it's the only place I found out what the light dash button was or how to use my bounce attack. I mean, I could have checked the options, but the game clearly told me how everything else works. I played through this game about 3 times, so I'm sure there's at least one place where it might tell you about it specifically, but you will run into challenges and situations where the game would expect you to know them beforehand. Nothing progress hampering, but you might be scratching your head at a memory token from time to time. And as for your puzzles, they come in a wide variety, from simple light grid clearing to racing to the goal or just running in place. Something small and simple to help you fill out your map and locate objectives easier, though some of them are regulated to the time of day, and without a system to move the time of day forward, you're waiting a couple of minutes before it changes. And for that, you could always set a marker that lights a beacon in the overworld to remind yourself on where it is. Speaking of beacons, you have a waypoint main objective marker on your screen at all times that points you in the direction of story progress whether you have an objective on your map or not. The only time where it doesn't particularly help is when you need to collect more memory tokens or get more vault keys. And the reason memory tokens are so important is because your friends find the other Chaos Emeralds that are on the map. To get these, you have to do slightly more involved mini-games, but they also give you story which fleshes out the islands, why the emeralds are drawn to them, and character writing that reminds you why we've come to enjoy these characters for all these years. Once you've gotten 6 Chaos Emeralds, you unlock your way to the boss area with another puzzle or minigame, and you get a boss fight on par with some of the series' past final boss fights right out of the gate. You first have to pass a physical challenge to reach the Chaos Emerald on the top of the boss's head, and then you use your combat techniques as Supersonic to take it down. The spectacle alone is amazing, but the music that comes with it is on par with the quality that you've expected from Sonic games of the past. Once you've defeated the Titan, you get another flashback to the past civilization, but defeating the boss did nothing for Amy. The only thing we can do is continue forward into the next island and fight the next Titan. If you're wondering why we have the same gameplay loop the whole time, it's the fact that Sonic gets shot down every time he makes his way to the next area. Ares is a desert area full of sand and deep canyons. If you wanted an area that really makes you use the map, it's this one. Kronos Island has a few hard to reach places, but those are mostly just the memory tokens and finding a well-hidden spring. Ares is full of crevasses, high cliffs, and underground tunnels. It also starts adding smaller unconnected islands only reachable by rails. This is where your waypoint markers, map, and compass come into play. Looking at your map is a must, but that also means filling it out as well. The game does its best with its main objective marker and story to lead you through an almost critical path that if you map out along your way, you won't have too hard of a time moving forward, but the game really wants you to interact with it. The map shows elevation, and the compass will bring up all map icons other than memory tokens in the open world. Map markers only show up once something has been mapped out, but hovering over a challenge will show you which areas will be affected. But even if something isn't mapped out, your waypoint marker that you can set shoots a beam of light into the sky and lets you know where you need to head in the overworld, and the main objective has a radar effect on the map that enlarges their icons, making them easier to find. Even if your view gets obstructed by, say, this game's Starfall event, it resurrects enemies, it puts giant light beams on the map to help you get special tokens, your waypoint marker still has its own distinct color, and your compass will always be able to find it. I think smart use of all of your tools will give you a deep appreciation for the map design in this game. But the map isn't the only thing that becomes more complex, so do the enemies. I don't think this game expects you to fight the low-level mooks that it litters around the world, but fighting them does randomly reward you trinkets like gears, keys, and more. Each area has at least one unique guardian, and they do become stronger, but some can have too strong of a gimmick that you might want to expedite with skill and abilities. That's why this game gives Sonic's multiple level up mechanics. You collect Coco, or not Koroks, and not Chow to level up his speed and ring capacity. To be honest, in normal play you don't really have to worry about your rings, but if you're planning to level them up to max, it might be a bit annoying to wait through dialogue that will level you up one level at a time. Then there are attack and defense fruits which level you up all at once. Attack is pretty obvious, but defense changes the amount of rings you lose when you take a hit. In terms of the game's difficulty, this is the only stat that seems to matter. Enemies don't seem to have more health, and they definitely don't get new moves because of the difficulty, but they will hit you harder. Finally, you get skill points that unlock new abilities, all but one of them are regulated to fighting, which really makes me wonder why Air Trick isn't something Sonic can just do, or they just give it to you like the Psyloop. These abilities are your main damage dealers, and most of them are free to use with two exceptions, but I'll get into that later. Having all of these options are nice, but they can bring down the overall difficulty of this game along with some core design choices. But at the very least, the addition of these abilities can keep combat feeling pretty fresh and allows for some form of player expression even if the skill ceiling is a bit low. Since level progression is the same from island to island and my style is to slowly explain the game as we go through it, let's move on to the volcanic Chaos Island. It's even more pieced out than any other area we've come to, so really taking in your environment is necessary to make your way through. The bumpy terrain is pretty fun to fling yourself off of, be it on purpose or by accident, and the sloped mountain area really gives use to the drop dash whether you're going up or down. The problem this island suffers though is how it wants to lay out its challenges. Getting tokens or unlocking the map has been mostly a three-dimensional affair up to this point. Sometimes the camera locks to a 2D plane, but it lasts only for about a second. It's only as intrusive as when the camera swings around cinematically, which means it wasn't so bad. But Chaos Island is full of challenges and areas that force you into a 2D perspective. The very idea of 2D gameplay within 3D Sonic is contentious in the Sonic community. And what I really think it comes down to for people is the feeling of compromising the idea of 3D Sonic. Everyone has their own tolerance for what they're able to put up with, even if they don't think the overall idea is inherently bad. I actually don't care about it in games like Sonic Forces or Generations, but Sonic Colors is the one that breaks my back. The problem with this game is that by Island 3, it goes out of its way to force you into 2D sections every chance it gets, even in large open areas. On the rails when you're going from the larger island to the smaller ones? Fine. In the large open area with the building where you first find your friend? Awful. Horrible. Now, most of this 2D is regulated to memory tokens, but that also means you won't be using springs or dash pads because they are also mostly relegated to memory tokens. That's a problem because springs have been a great use of getting extra height to just boost off of wherever you want to. Now instead of 360 degrees of freedom, you only have two directions to choose from. You advertently try to get away from them on this map and it makes moving around a bit of a chore. It's a shame because Chaos Island really tries to bring in the natural map layout with these challenges, but its restrictiveness feels counterintuitive to the game feel of the open world. The only reason I think they did this was to add some sense of challenge. I'll use a map completion challenge as an example. It's a simple race to the finish line with two broken towers, something you may have done before. While you can get up to both of these towers in 3D, if you accidentally jump in a certain area, your perspective is forced to 2D. This perspective is more difficult to get through, yes, but the freedom and movement you actively lose isn't worth it. But these small 2D sections do tend to have quick ways out of them, and if you finagle some of them just right, you can still use them for more free movement. It's a shame because this is the only island that is this aggressive about it. This game also tests your patience on the game's biggest technical flaw. This game has some pretty aggressive pop-in that gets worse the further in the game you get as islands expand and become more complex. It doesn't get in the way of gameplay, but it will have you scratching your head when you might be looking for a way to get up to a memory token because those platforms are affected the most. That being said, certain elements take priority when loading in, like grind rails, springs, and ramps. I don't think I've seen a grind rail just pop in out of nowhere, but if it did, it was probably the first thing to do so, because they are your general mode of transportation around the island when you unlock map challenges or moving from one small island to another. But at that point, you might be asking the question, what's the difference between draw distance and pop in? And the answer is, if everything else is rendered and something else isn't, then it pops in. By Island 4, Rhea Island, the game starts to ramp up, but also wind down. This is the only island that breaks the mold and becomes more focused in its objectives, while the narrative comes to a head with all of our characters and mysteries starting to wrap themselves up. That said, in my personal opinion, this island has some of the best 3D Sonic gameplay in this game and in quite possibly the whole franchise. It finally puts all of our movement to the test, even the combat to a much lesser extent. I was kind of worried going into this island after Island 3, but while it still has its 2D challenges, they managed to mix it up, so leaving this island made me feel better than going in. Then finally our last area, Oranos Island, where we return to our previous gameplay loop and the story wraps itself up. I think this island hits the perfect balance of challenge and exploration that Chaos Island was trying to go for. If I do have one nitpick, it's that on these islands there are these blue treasure caches where you can side loop and get an assortment of trinkets out of. From what I gather, these aren't random, but by the time you get to the third island, they start turning into springs and dash panels most of the time, which is fine in and of itself, but unlike the trinket ones that disappear forever, the movement ones turn back into blue glowy stuff, and when you're aimlessly running around, you can forget and waste your time. Just a little annoying. If there's one last thing to talk about on the overall game, it's that before the end of it you should switch to hard mode. You'll miss a playable section after the Oranos boss if you are playing on normal or lower. The saving grace is that you can make that switch even before you land the final hit on the last boss. That being said, hard mode is not hard. Nothing changes other than the damage you take. No higher health, no new enemy moves, nothing. That being said, it's kind of funny how hard mode turns this game into a classic Sonic game where you basically lose all of your rings in one hit and you have to get them back. Though I think a game like this where you easily become overpowered, hard mode should maybe raise the health of enemies, even though that's something I don't particularly like. Well, with the base game wrapped up, let's get into that story I completely glossed over. There's a timestamp taking you to the presentation section of this review. To be honest, I don't think there's much to spoil about this game. It's something you play and experience, and I haven't shown off anything that hasn't already been seen in pre-release footage and pictures, but everyone has their own discrepancies. I don't write these reviews as buyer's guides. Whatever value you put on the things you want against their value that they're actually being sold for is your choice. I think this game is very good and very fun and is worth $60, and with free content being doled out throughout the next year, it will raise in value while most likely lowering in sales price. Honestly, I played this game like 3 times and I fell through the floor like once. And trust me, I've fallen through the floor in better games. Big quotation marks. But rest assured, what you're buying at base is a complete video game. Whatever that also means to you as well. Onto the story, however, I find it funny how secretive Sega was being to the intricacies of our narratives, but gave away the bulk of the storytelling elements. This is a character-driven narrative that has a mystery as a secondary plot point. I always believe that a great mystery story is one that wants me to solve it. What I've come to learn is that an okay mystery is one that hardly affects the plot. Sure, we don't know why the Chaos Emeralds are on the island, or what happened to Eggman, or what the little girl is about, but our plot is about finding our friends. Through this, everything starts to come together. The little girl is an AI Eggman created. The island was home to wayward aliens from a destroyed planet where the Chaos Emeralds originated, being brought here by picking up the power of the Master Emerald. The mysterious voice is the planet destroyer that the aliens trapped in cyberspace when it followed them to Earth, and we unknowingly let it free. Solving the mystery doesn't end our story, and it doesn't give us our solution either, but it does wrap everything up in a nice bow. Bits and pieces of this background plot are given to us as we interact with our friends, as we figure out a way to rescue them, and that is the bulk of our storytelling. Sonic's extended cast has been put on the sidelines of the franchise for over the last 10 years, and from a gameplay perspective, that's still the case. This time, however, Amy, Knuckles, and Tails get a healthy dose of characterization. This is thanks in part to the main scriptwriter being Ian Flynn, a man who's worked on Sonic all the way back when Archie comics were still a thing, and still writes for the current IDW run. You know, when he's not writing for a video game. And character writing is definitely his strength. From Amy's sense of selflessness to help others,
Coco says they need to find their one
to Knuckles' feelings of duty
Unit, but an enemy has them pinned down here.
and Tails' insecurities.
One wrong turn and I fall apart.
All of these ideas are explored and fleshed out in relationship to the Cocos, who are our closest link to the lost civilization and its people. They'll generally have some sort of theme connecting the two of them, searching for a lost love, a military troop trying to protect their homeland, or an apprentice waiting for their hero. Very simple and on the nose. This coincides with cutscenes that flash back to the history of the island itself. While I said it's simple, I think writing like this is when Sonic is at its best. It's essentially a cast of mostly static characters with strong character traits that flesh out the world and new characters around them. The new character this time being Eggman's AI, Sage. Sage is an AI Eggman developed to help him figure out the mysteries of the island. Visual storytelling shows us that he's been here for quite some time before the events of the game, and it was just at the beginning did he figure out a way to truly interact with it. You also get some egg memos if you know where to find them. Sage has been powered up, so to speak, by interfacing with the island's advanced alien technology. I think it's what gives her her form, but I'm pretty positive it's what gives her her lasers. But if anyone's going through change in this story, it's her. It's a simple robot girl understands what it means to have feelings, but it's my favorite type being she clearly feels something and doesn't try to pretend that she doesn't. She just has a hard time recognizing it. It expresses itself as wanting a sense of familial love from Eggman and starting to believe in more than just cold hard calculated numbers. Eggman in turn reciprocates these feelings, and she only starts to believe in others because of how she watches and interacts with Sonic and his friends.
Sonic has overcome impossible odds over and over again. I know he'll save us all.
To get to my more personal gripes, it's that everyone's arc has kind of been done before. These characters don't go through much development, yet they all speak of great change. This game focuses more on re-establishment than changing them. Our side characters are hardly any different than they were at, say, the end of Sonic Adventure, but that's a game from over 20 years ago, so this type of characterization is needed in a franchise that is reinvigorating itself. The kids who played Sonic Adventure are having kids of their own, kids that watched the Sonic 2 movie. Amy isn't in that movie. Sega's gotta let them know now. I think this reinvigoration and re-establishment is fine, but I do think it does one character a disservice. Unlike Amy and Knuckles, who have just briefly shown up in the background for the past games, Tails has constantly been hanging around. I honestly think until the last two previous mainline games, everything has been kind of fine for every character. Yeah, being jealous of Eggman in Lost World is kinda odd, but he was still self-reliant. But his character in Forces was downright awful, so broken up over the idea of Sonic being gone that he can't even deal with Chaos Zero, the same Tails who fought off Chaos 4 and definitely fought off Eggman in a giant mech. Then in the next game, he fought off Eggman again, believing he had seen Sonic die right in front of his eyes. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with trying to make an impromptu character art with previous bad writing, but it still just kinda rings hollow. I think my biggest problem though is with the line, "Sonic, am I a burden to you?" Amy wanting to spread love is not much different than, "I can have an adventure even by myself."
It may take us far apart.
I'll admit, I do envy your lifestyle.
Knuckles thinking of leaving his island every now and then isn't that big of a deal even by modern standards.
Live a little. Maybe I could.
But Tails' arc in Sonic Adventure was so personal that it feels kinda bad to just do it over again.
If that's okay.
Or at the very least, lean so heavily on how he can be useful to Sonic. It feels like two full steps backwards than the one it was intended as. Oh, and Sonic's just Sonic. What are you expecting from him? He's the most static of us all. The best thing about Sonic is putting him through his paces and showing us different facets of him through different situations, which this game does in spades. Has in spades. What's the turn of phrase? Anyway, I think this shows up his best when he practically dies and his friends give up their own newly gained freedom for him to keep fighting. It shows us that all of them value and believe in each other enough to entrust their lives to one another, and encourages Sage to get Eggman to work together with Sonic to save the day. Oh right, the whole Sonic dying thing is technically an ongoing plot point and a game mechanic, but it's mostly just a setup for this one thematic scene. And that's the point. The point of believing in something even when faced with inevitable adversity. Though I think the theme and character writing are a bit too lopsided. I got a better sense of the theme from the Japanese script, but unlike the English one, which is the base original script for this entire game, its characters felt a bit stiff. While the premise, plot structure, and themes were basically handled by the Japanese team, everyone came together to connect the plot points and hash things out. I really do like the story, but I do think that both can improve by the next game by working more closely together from start to finish.
Please.
Next up is presentation. Man, this game can be really pretty when it wants to be, and it's all about lighting. When first showed off, some people thought this game looked boring and dull, but I could tell right out of the gate that it was made this way to be more dynamic with the Hedgehog Engine 2's lighting system. One of the things I wanted the most for the longest time in a Sonic game was customizable day settings, different lightings for the day, sunset, nighttime, you get it. Generations is what made me really aware of this, and Sonic R was the only one to give me what I wanted, and that also had a weather setting, but this game proved me right. Different cyber levels have different time of day lightings, fighting the second boss at night and having it go into the day while flying over the entire map, or fighting the dirt boss in the clear sky and slowly starts to rain as it goes on. This game looks great even if it's not as fantastical as some people would expect it to be, but even this more realistic style fits Sonic and it still pulls out all of the fantastical when it wants to. I mean, for as much as people complain about seeing Green Hill again in the cyberspace levels, our first island is still pretty much Green Hill, like it always is. Like it always is. Like it always is. And if you look close enough, while sparse, you may find a loop-de-loop naturally in the open world, and while all of these floating platforms are littered around the area, just because they don't have the same textures as the ground doesn't make them any different than our past games. The minute you get out of cyberspace, there's a rail just floating to your left. It's like it's always been. As stated before, the camera can be pretty dynamic. Even in this open world, they go out of their way to swing it around for you. However, sometimes it can be too dynamic. I would turn off auto reset camera position myself. That way during certain segments it won't swing around. But even then it can be very picky. As for our cyberspace levels, they're all returning level themes except for one. You will always be running through Green Hill, Chemical Plant, Sky Sanctuary, and Highway for lack of a better term. Highway is one word, like Hydrocity Zone. I get the fatigue people feel with these levels. I feel it too, but personally we don't spend enough time in them for me to be bothered either. But I do hope for new ones in the next game. The enemies are fun and varied, really living up to their namesakes and looking intimidating, and no, they made the sexy robot that way on purpose. Those hips really don't lie. The music is really something special. The three main islands have 7 movements to their overworld theme, all of them with different varieties and instruments. Each cyberspace level obviously has its own music track, but all of them being based on different electronic genres makes them have a fun bit of theming. And then the boss battles blast dynamic rock music at you. I mean, they just split up the second and first half of the song, but hey, I've only got it to sound really good once. Then you add in all the ambient noises of crickets, fire crackling, and Sonic's feet, and you have a unison of sounds and visuals that's practically perfect. You know, except for the pop-in. And finally, we talk about the raw gameplay and the most gritty of details. Let's start off with the combat. As I said earlier, combat in this game is fairly simple as your side-scrolling beat-em-up. You have a normal attack button, dodge, parry, and some special attacks. I think the most unique thing is that Sonic can still jump into enemies like normal. But, just like most of your side-scrolling beat-em-ups, no matter how many moves you have, the flow of combat will most likely hinge on the little things your enemies can do. Most of the Guardians give you some sort of physical challenge before you're rewarded by just beating up a lump of metal, but for your basic enemies, they gradually become more defensive as you go from island to island. I feel like this is an answer to how powerful Sonic can get, because even at the start of the game, mobs can be one-shotted with just a homing attack. The problem with this is that it just makes most of your offensive tools just big damage dealers when they should be used for more different utility. For example, towers are very weak to stomps, and everything is very weak to silent. Your parry is very busted. You can hold it down for about 15 seconds before Sonic does an animation that leaves him open to an attack. That's more than enough time to wait out any attack, and it seems like a pretty late change to the game by the fact that there are still parry challenges on the map. However, even then, you probably won't be using it for most of the game because of how gimmicky some Guardians can be, so if you aren't fishing for it, you probably aren't using it until the game forces you to, and it will, but the most creative use is in an enemy in the first area. But that's just base utility. What about the special moves? If it's not a single target move, most enemies stay too far out of range of each other for your larger area of effect moves to hit them like the Cyclone King. Then you have your enemy's defensive options that get in the way and stop your attacks. I get wanting players to use the side loop in combat, but having an enemy I'm not focused on completely block and stop my combo isn't fun. As for the Guardians, I think a lot of their gimmicks are pretty fun. Opening up is interesting in and of itself, and with skillful play you can kill them in one cycle before they get to do their gimmick again, and a move like the quick side loop, which has its own meter to build up with, can be a good tool and reward to make doing extra damage easier. There are a lot of little details in this combat system for it to be more nuanced, but I feel some of them were stripped away for the sake of ease of play, like the parry. So here's a small list of things I noticed and would like to see implemented in the next game in some way. First off, lower the parry window timing. It's pretty self-explanatory. Make it an option in the game if people want it to be easier or not, or connected to the difficulty setting. The special dodge Sonic does for an enemy when they start blocking with a red barrier should be used as a last minute dodge reward. Even if he's like super far away, just zoop him behind him, I don't care. I don't know if this should also slow down time, because some enemies late in the game start baiting your parry, and when done, it just kinda extends the battle for longer than it needs to be, but that's more of a problem with the attack design of the stronger ninja. All specials having a secondary action to them is great, like boosting or having to have already started a combo, but maybe the Phantom Rush meter should be used in conjunction with some of them to make getting into some of them more engaging, like the quick side loop. Phantom Rush is just a combo bonus for your normal attack, so maybe give some special properties to your specials as well. Do they already have that? I don't think they do. Do they do more damage? Sonic has this really interesting movement option at the end of combos. If you do a combo on an enemy enough or pop them up in the air, Sonic can send them flying. Homing attacking can be pretty good for chasing them, but the window to do so should be made a bit more larger. Sonic also has directional inputs at the end of his combos, but they don't seem to work in any significant way other than left and right. It feels like up and down has some sort of influence, but I think Sonic's angle of approach has more of an effect on sending enemies back. But left and right are interesting because Sonic will swing around to that side, and just a little bit of changing your position can set up for some abilities better. The combat system at its core is very simple. You can lay most things out by just doing the Sonic Boom from a distance or doing a triple bounce to take out a group of enemies, but if you want to do more, you have the options, but those options are still restrained by what feels like fear of making it too complicated or difficult. But the fact that this game does become more difficult as it goes on, especially with its boss fights that become more combat focused, I think we can push through. Earlier I said they can help out with the difficulty by giving enemies more health, but that doesn't fix their fundamental gameplay issue. For the next game, I'd like to see them not hold back with the combat system, and if they're worried about ease of play, they should just give players more options like they do for Sonic's movement stats like speed and acceleration. And now we're on to the meat and potatoes of this platforming video game, the platforming. If I had to say the thing that left the biggest impression on me, it's that jumping feels kinda bad. Sounds pretty damning, but this game's always move forward playstyle and other mechanics lean into it enough to not be the worst thing in the world, and there are a lot of other settings you can tweak to make it feel better. This game opens up by asking you what kind of playstyle you like to play as, action or high speed style. These options tweak the many movement options you have in the game, such as starting and turning speeds and acceleration. I can't remember what they were set to because I've already changed them myself, so those changes are saved. Either way, these options are only in effect in the open world. Cyberspace levels have locked settings, and after messing around with them, I feel like they're set on the lower end, probably lower than the lower end to be honest. The stark contrast between the two is baffling because it just makes it difficult to get yourself mentally prepared for the actual levels. They both have their own little differences that need to be addressed as well. Let's start with the cyberspace levels. Most people would probably say they're the weakest part of this game, and I'd have to agree for the most part, though I still enjoy them well enough. But to be fair, I enjoy a more stage-based Sonic game. These stages are extra bite-sized than ever before. They hardly ever last over a minute, and you're lucky if you push anywhere around 2, but in this large open world game, these small challenges are a fun distraction. In my honest opinion, it's just the controls that bother me. These levels are comprised of not just themes, but also actual level design from previous Sonic games, with Sonic having so many more options make them feel new and fresh. While people have criticized the overall movement, a lot have also caught on to the many options and quirks Sonic has in this game. First of all, you can boost in any direction at any time, on the ground or in the air, and like Sonic Forces, his air boost gives him a bit of upward lift. Add on the double jump and the expanded distance of the homing attack reticle, and you can practically save yourself from a lot of bad falls. I've saved myself from many a mistake or done a cool maneuver with this change, even in the open world. I almost fell off the map so many times. Also, this game doesn't make his boost an attack, it's more like a run button from Lost World, meaning you have to navigate around enemies. One of my problems, however, is that only in cyberspace, Sonic's air boost doesn't continue when he touches the ground. I don't know why it does that here when it's normal in the open world, but it messes with the overall flow of some sections. In fact, just jumping at all in the entire game makes you stop boosting. It's odd. It's because of mechanics like these and some level design choices that I've become very aware of how much in the air Sonic spins in this game. First off, let's talk about killing enemies. When Sonic homing attacks an enemy, he pops up higher in the air than he ever has in any past game. For the open world where there's combat, that makes sense. You get enough time to reorientate your camera to keep attacking enemies around you. In cyberspace, however, it feels like it takes up too much time. Some people say it's to encourage avoiding enemies to get S ranks, but most S ranks in this game are a joke to get, and they still have enemy homing attack chains, and it means a mandatory traversal. It's odd because the balloons in this game don't have this large lag time, so I wonder why they didn't implement that timing only in the cyberspace where you never do combat. Then you start to notice how many air actions you have. One stomp, one air boost, and a double jump that replenishes after interacting with an object like an enemy or an air ring. You might be thinking, Hawk, why would you need more than one stomp? And that's just because I tend to stop on pulse repeatedly to gather myself after messing up a jump. But it made me uncomfortably aware of how long you stay in the air in this game and how many actions you can only make once. It's not really a problem until you see something just barely out of reach and you can't get it, or you realize you missed a place to take a step, or you're dealing with a homing attack chain or an air ring challenge that if you just had one more air boost, you could glide right by. It feels restrictive for how much time you're airborne. Now, I'm not saying unlimited air boost should be the solution, but having more things replenish it like rails and bounce pads would be appreciated, like let's say the launchers. But I do need unlimited stomps. That's not going to put your game design in jeopardy, that will just make me feel good. Then there's smaller things like the drop dash being almost worthless in 2D stages. I can never get it to work the way I want it to, and I feel a part of that problem is the camera gets a bit too cinematic for its own good. Even then, it's just kinda bad on its own, so the fun little secret of Sonic just curling into a ball by pressing down on the control stick is also a waste of time. I'd make inputs be less dynamic if you're going to actually bind him to a 2D plane. And then you have the whole deal of 2D feeling slower than 3D cyberspace levels, and I wonder if that's just because of the camera angle or they actually tweaked him, but I wouldn't put it past them to do the latter. But now that that's all aired out, let's jump back to our starting point of jumping feels kinda bad, and by that what I mean is making precise jumps feels bad. All of these movement tweaks in this game only seem to be on the ground, so let's say your initial top speed is maxed out. The minute you make a jump, the sudden decrease in speed will make you feel like you're being pushed back. Then you add on the fact that jumping seems to have its own odd acceleration quirk, you have a discrepancy hitting you back to back. For smaller jumps, you have to let go of the stick. Sonic will stop on a dime. In fact, he will always stop on a dime when you let go of the stick. And to be honest, that doesn't feel particularly good, at least not in a Sonic game. You can't fix this in the cyberspace levels, but messing with the settings, the open world can start to feel better. People will constantly go on and on about how Sonic the Hedgehog should feel, yet this game is the only one that gives each individual person that chance to do what they want. Should everyone have that choice? No. But with this game, we can all come together and make a better consensus. After messing around with the settings, you realize that there's a good amount of momentum-based movement in this game. Sonic will have a harder time running uphill and an easier one running down it. Will it ever be as much as most people want? No, but it's there and that's a good starting point. I feel at my best with 50% initial speed, 75% initial boost speed, and 25% acceleration, but all of these tweaks feel like they only work on the ground, and for a game that wants you to be in the air every half second, it feels like he's glued to it. You really feel this in Ares Islands with its sloped cliffs and plateaus. If you don't jump early enough, you feel this weight holding you back or pulling you down. That's because Sonic will just run down almost any slope no matter how steep, and if there's a curve, he'll stick to it. And I think that's fine. Sometimes I don't want to just fly off into the air and stay on the ground, but if this type of system is going to be in the game, I want jumping to feel better and be tweaked as well. Great examples of this are already in the game. In Cyberspace 4-5, you have a challenge where Sonic is sent off a dash ramp and he has so much air mobility, he can pick one of 3 different routes while he's floating through the air, and all of the rails have different physics and movements tied to them that make them feel really loose. It's the closest to classic Sonic Adventure type slope jumping we have seen since. So now that we went through the good and the bad, let's talk about the things that I just enjoyed, so please don't mind if I repeat myself a bit. I really like all of the pre-release extras, especially the Knuckles short animation. Let him stretch his dreads and be cool again. Comedy shorts are nice, but a serious one every now and then is a good palate cleanser. For as much as I harped on about the writing, the dialogue paired with this serious tone is a perfect match, though next time I would like a slightly lighter tone overall. While I don't think that the change of these characters in the story or the promise of it to come at the end is or will be as great as some other people make it out to be, I'm interested in just seeing more of them and more active roles in the future. These cyberspace levels are probably some of the best in the bite-sized variety that we've been seeing since Sonic Colors. Nothing is too out of place or too brain-dead, and even if there is a gimmick, it's light enough to not feel overbearing like an auto-scrolling bounce pad level or some Flappy Bird ripoff. Drifting is still bad though. If you can't at least hit Sonic Unleashed HD, which still isn't even as good as Generations, I wouldn't bother. At least it can kill you consistently in this game. The dynamism in this game's presentation is a marvel. I think the only thing that's guaranteed to happen to you is that you'll start in the open world in the rain. That being said, the lighting is a bit too aggressive with some objects. In the open world it makes sense, but in levels I like drop shadows to be under things like Sonic and Red Rings. But I do want to see different times of day come back, and different weather effects also make a return because those are my favorite things aesthetically. The music is fantastic. The voice acting spectacular, comes on a little thick in the first island, but it evens out by the second. But even that first island does a fantastic job of setting the tone. Some of the open world puzzles are pretty fun. One of my favorites would have to be getting the ball through the hoop, a physics-based puzzle. Oddly enough, the light grid grew on me by the end, and I like messing around with those not Tetris blocks. But nothing can beat a good race to the finish. Though the hacking minigame has a really good through line that even applies to one of the 4 major bosses when you think about it. For a game with as many collectibles as this one has, it really respects your time and what you want to prioritize. You can unlock all of the Chaos Emeralds by just fully completing about 3 or 4 cyberspace levels when there are generally 7 per island. You can find purple coin tokens to catch fish with Big the Cat. There's a whole fishing minigame that's so auxiliary that I didn't even mention it because it doesn't matter. Catching fish gets you points to buy any collectible in the game that isn't a Chaos Emerald. The rate exponentially gets higher, so instead of using 1 coin to get back 2, you spend 8 to get back 16. It's something you do if you want to get a move on or just relax. Learn some fish facts, listen to some lo-fi, pick up fast travel points, get those egg memos for your precious lore, you lore fiends. And finally, while I may like a more leveled based Sonic game, this open world is just plain fun to run around in. I think a game that is tailored more like the challenges to get to certain Chaos Emeralds would be the perfect middle ground of my stage-based fun mixed with this open world. The last Emerald generally puts you through your paces and has the kinetic gameplay that asks you to use your entire toolset that I'm looking for. I hear a lot of people say that this game is a good base to build off of, and while I know it's a shorthand turn of phrase, I feel like all of our building blocks are already here. What matters is how they choose to put them together the next time. This game has clearly been reworked time and time again, with structures and level design clearly abandoned. I'm looking at you, Rhea Island, that's just the second half of Kronos Island and holder of almost all of our pre-release footage. I really like this game. It feels like an amalgamation of everything we've gotten before. Larger 3D areas than Sonic Adventure or even Sonic 06 could even dream of. Collectibles and mission objectives that respect your time better than Sonic Unleashed ever could. cyberspace challenges that make getting red rings not a chore like Colors, Lost World, or Forces, 3D level design that I think is still on par with Generations even if it's not in the stages where I would like them to be, and a story that takes itself seriously while still having bouts of levity and being wholehearted like Adventures of Old. I've talked before about Sonic Team developers trying to chase coattails or being pushed to make certain types of games to their detriment, but this title feels like everyone came together and decided to put all of their strengths into a cohesive vision. I've never had a chance to review a brand new Sonic game experience so close to release, and you could still say that I haven't. And I don't know how to end this video. Sonic the Hedgehog means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and everyone comes in with their own wants and expectations, and I can only talk about my own and my own experience. What I experienced was a game trying to push forward the idea of what this franchise is, and while it was a good push, it was a tepid one. They walked back and forth on how far to go, and I think next time they can go even further. This game is the culmination of the ones that came before it, an acceptance of the series' highs and lows, and a step forward into a new frontier of Sonic the Hedgehog. Until we meet again, mata ao, until we meet again.